The individual in question is 33 years of age. Louis Anak sat on a recently constructed and cleaned marine teak and iron bench overlooking Riff Lake. During numerous visits, he and his family engaged in swimming activities on the lake. He examined the recently polished brass plaque on the bench, which was donated by the Edmonds family of Mossy Rock in memory of their beloved grandfather Kennewick Edmonds. This bench is intended for the enjoyment of all visitors to the area, which Louis held in high regard. As a native of the region, Louis read the inscription and responded with a brief, ironic, and somewhat resentful laugh. He understood the reasons behind his late grandfather's affection for this area, particularly the observation deck where a bench had been placed in his honor. From this vantage point, Kennewick he often took respite and gazed longingly at the crystal blue water that flooded his childhood home decades ago when the Tacoma City Light Company constructed the Mossy Rock Dam with the intention of generating electricity for the city. Louis was aware that the city of Riff was situated somewhere beneath the shimmering surface of the lake, which now reflected a magnificent blue. The blue sky and ragged clouds under the forest canopy are a variety of native pine trees that surround the lake. Some of the western whites and ponderosas towered over 36 meters into the sky. As a child, Louis always dreamed of climbing to the top of one of them to see if he could touch the endless sky. He had a cherished memory of his late father. One day, when he was a young boy, he and his father were lying on their backs on the shore of a lake, relaxing with their vintage bamboo HL rods. Leonard was leaning against a tree. They were tuned into the salmon that thrive in these waters. They looked up at the sky, admiring the amazing work of nature, and simultaneously relaxing. He told his father about his desire to climb to the top of one of the pine trees. The father was silent for several minutes and did not even pay attention to Louis's statement. Just as Louis thought his father must have missed his words, he began humming a line from Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze. His father was silent for several minutes, seemingly unaware of Louis's statement. Just as Louis began to wonder whether his father had missed his words, he began humming a line from Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze. He then apologized, saying, "Forgive me while I kiss the sky." His vocal abilities were severely limited, rendering him incapable of accurately reproducing melodies, yet this did not deter him from singing. As his father's voice repeated the line, teenage Louis experienced a sense of embarrassment, hoping to avoid being observed while singing. However, in adulthood, this incident left a distinct and enduring impression on Louis. Both of his parents died of cancer when he was very young. This fact, along with his understanding of genetics, was one of the reasons why this meeting occurred. Given the brevity of life, Louis's attention was now drawn to the lake itself, which is nearly 23 miles long. It is so deep that no light could penetrate the darkness that shrouded the once vibrant close-knit community of Riff was shrouded in darkness, obfuscating any evidence of its existence. It would never again be visible in the light. Louis considered this an apt metaphor for his marriage to any passerby not familiar with the nightmare Louis had been living through lately. He would appear to be serenely soaking up the solitary beauty of the warm fall weather that occasionally visited the area. Despite its current political incorrectness, the phenomenon is still referred to as Indian summer by locals in the Pacific Northwest. For many, it is a truly exceptional time and place on Earth, offering a welcome reprieve from the otherwise dreary rain that characterizes the region's 9-month-long winter season. While outwardly calm, Louis was, in fact, seething with frustration. He was an only child, and this situation forced him to confront his challenges alone. Louis was unable to confide in any of his colleagues outside of the firehouse, as they did not engage in the same level of emotional openness as depicted on television. Firefighters do not typically discuss their fears and emotions with one another, as it is perceived that displaying vulnerability could potentially lead to a loss of confidence in them. Their professional lives are heavily reliant on maintaining a sense of strength and resilience. Each member of the group was aware of the potential consequences of a moment's hesitation, caused by uncertainty regarding the trustworthiness of others in extreme conditions. Louis was not entirely isolated in this situation. He had deliberately arrived early, relying on the purported healing powers of lake and nature's magical natural oil to assist him in surviving this meeting, which he anticipated would soon take place. His wife had requested it, and his lawyer advised that it would be in his best interest to grant the request. It would also be advantageous in family court. Furthermore, his lawyer was becoming increasingly exasperated with Blaine's persistent creation of obstacles to delay the inevitable. Lewis was perplexed by Blaine's insistence that their marriage could withstand her erratic behavior. He sought the counsel of his lawyer, who advised him to require a mandatory consultation was scheduled. It was of no consequence to her that in the state of Washington, a family court judge is unable to appoint her. Both lawyers attempted to communicate with Blaine on numerous occasions, yet their efforts were futile. Lewis believed that Blaine would benefit from some form of therapeutic intervention, but that was no longer his concern. He exhaled, contemplating that the matter would ultimately conclude that day. Blaine could have demanded a meeting, but Lewis was insistent on the spot. He was aware that the summer crowds would be a distant memory, so they would most likely have the place to themselves for this meeting. The meeting did not proceed as Blaine had expected. He glanced briefly at his watch and noted that she should arrive in a few minutes. However, he was aware that he had plenty of time. On the one hand, Blaine would have to travel a considerable distance on Highway 12, which she hated. She never got anything done on time, including their wedding, which was an hour late. He let out a similar cynical chuckle as the quick memory of it came to him. He had considered leaving the church 20 minutes late, as his best man had jokingly suggested over 13 years ago. However, he quickly dismissed this thought, as the truth was that the first 12.5 years of his marriage to Blaine had been a perfect dream. Lewis loved his two daughters, Rinner and Lacey, more than life itself. Rain, as she was called, was a daddy's girl through and through. Although Rain was already studying and preparing to become a firefighter, just like her idolized father, Lacey was her father's living double. This turned out to be just one of many difficulties that family courts do not like to separate children from. Another factor is that in Washington state, family law does not set an age that allows a child under 18 to choose which parent to live with during a divorce. However, according to the lawyer, all is not lost. Despite the complexities of Washington divorce and child custody laws, there is still hope for the couple. If a husband and wife submit a childcare plan to the court and the judge deems it to be comprehensive, detailed, and financially fair for the children, he will approve it without amendments. The lawyer advised Lewis to propose a challenging but achievable solution to his wife. Lewis was a pragmatic individual even before seeking legal counsel. He was informed that his employment as a firefighter for the Riverside Fire Department, RFA, would almost certainly preclude him from obtaining primary custody of his daughters. The inherently dangerous nature of the work and the erratic work schedule presented significant obstacles to the consideration of custody. It required a substantial investment of time and financial resources to develop the plan he initiated. He closed his eyes and reflected on that distressing on that day several months ago, when his nightmare existence began. He was unable to determine whether his current situation was a reality or a dream. It was both surreal and terrifyingly repetitive. "Lewis, would you kindly join me in the living room?" He had just completed his nightly ritual of putting the girls to bed in their shared bedroom when he heard her voice. Despite his need for sleep because his next 24-hour shift began tomorrow morning, he was eager to talk to his wife. The next day, the evening shift would commence. He was eager to converse with his wife. He hoped that Blaine was amenable to continuing their deliberations regarding the purchase of a home of their own. The four of them currently resided in a rented 3-bedroom apartment. The couple lived in a bedroom apartment and were eager to own a home of their own. Now that their careers were secure, both agreed that it was much better to raise their daughters in a home they owned. He was on his way to the living room and looked into the kitchen. He grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator and sat down on the worn sofa. They had inherited the sofa from their parents. He crossed his right leg over his left so that he was facing her. He then proceeded to ruffle Bland's flowing blonde hair, which was covering her ear, for a moment before carefully tucking it behind the shell of her ear and placing his hand on her shoulder. He inquired about her well-being, but he did not remember much after that. His memories of their conversation were mostly fragmented. The emotional response was characterized by a series of intense, conflicting feelings, including shock, disbelief and anger. However, his reaction was nevertheless predictable and consistent. In the months that followed, he continued to experience feelings of embarrassment and self-reproach, particularly regarding his emotional display and the weakness he had exhibited. He left the house, leaving behind a trail of tears. He subsequently departed from the source of his distress. One advantage of his occupation as a firefighter is that he was able to secure lodging without difficulty. His prolonged absence was not questioned by anyone. After a few days, he was able to reconstruct the information his wife had conveyed to him. She had not explicitly requested his presence. She simply stated her intention to act when he finally returned home. He was going to implore his wife not to destroy their family and to seek counseling with him to salvage their marriage. However, before he could begin, he was immediately confronted by his loving and innocent daughters. His daughters, Blaine, promised him that they would come to her parents' house for the meeting. He turned and looked at his wife, who stood there with a sly, victorious grin on her face. The love he once felt for her is no longer present, it has been replaced by burning hatred. He glanced at Blaine, his usually calm face contorted with rage bordering on murder. For a moment, her look of superiority faded, and was replaced by fear. His demeanor shifted, replaced by a sense of trepidation. At this juncture, his daughters initiated a series of inquiries, seeking to ascertain the rationale behind his departure. He was compelled to physically resist the urge to flee from the rain and Lacey's impassioned embrace, as she pleaded, screamed, and cried. The intensity of the situation was overwhelming, and he was acutely aware that this memory would likely persist as a recurring theme in his mind. Until his demise, Lewis was aware that the alternative would prove more detrimental to his daughters in the long term. He was grateful to Blaine and, in an instant, went from a weak victim to a man whose path was clear. One day, Lewis mentally thanked her and regained his dignity, taking the first step towards recovery. Today, he thanked her, acknowledging the challenges his daughters were facing. "It is my hope that one day you will understand me, your mother, and I just grew apart. We have differing aspirations for our lives, but I promise you that I will never abandon you. I will see you often and love you forever." He never looked back at Blaine when he was finally released from the grasp of his daughters. He deliberately walked out of his apartment one last time since that day. Lewis has not spoken a word to his soon-to-be ex-wife. Lewis's wife, in a prudent decision, permitted her lawyer to represent her. Lewis was uncertain as to whether he had dozed off or whether he was so engrossed in his memories that he had lost track of time. "Hello, Lewis. Thank you for meeting with me. Our daughters miss you very much." Her voice, which had once been an encouraging and caring, the greeting elicited a visceral reaction, akin to the sensation of nails on an old chalkboard. He shook his head in an attempt to clear his thoughts. "It's showtime," Blaine informed him. "In an ideal world, I would never have to look at your face again." He did not even glance in her direction. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the lake, seeking. He perceived her as being shocked and gasping in surprise. She was under the impression that the session would proceed in a different manner. Lewis was unable to suppress a smile and look at her. He was aware that this was at her expense, but he felt compelled to inform her of something before she began. This would be their final conversation on the topic if she repeated it. One of those implausible justifications that you repeatedly espoused, namely that professing your love for me would fortify our marriage. Alternatively, you might suggest that my fragile male ego is the sole obstacle, or even imply that I bear responsibility for the dissolution of our family. In such instances, I will immediately exit the premises. Your presence is so repugnant to me that I am physically ill at the mere sight of you, Lewis. I am unsure if Blaine was preparing to reiterate his nauseating monologue, but I love you both. Let me spare you the effort, Blaine. He indicated the large, ubiquitous manila envelope on the seat of the bench. These are divorce papers that will result in the dissolution of our marriage. Upon your departure from this location in the near future, you will take them with you. You will then sign them after your lawyer has reviewed them. You will return them to the office of my lawyer. Within 36 hours, he turned away from her to admire the breathtaking view once more and then continued, your lawyer will confirm that everything here meets the state's parenting plan requirements. However, I do not want a cheating wife, so we'll both end up getting a divorce. Please pay attention because this is important. Lewis sighed in disappointment, although he was aware that Blaine would make things more difficult. The parenting plan is what the family court looks at the most. What I am suggesting is fair. We don't have much savings, so the rest will be divided in half. You will have custody of the girls. There is no basis for contesting this arrangement. The girls require a mother, and despite your shortcomings as a wife, you were a capable mother. Therefore, this arrangement is appropriate. Additionally, you will have an apartment, which will prevent the girls from having to change schools or look for new friends. I will contribute half of the housing costs and more than the minimum required amount of child support. Additionally, I will have frequent opportunities to spend time with my daughters. At that moment, a range of emotions were experienced by Blaine, including surprise, happiness, and disappointment. She relied on Louis's affection for his daughters to maintain his presence in the marriage. At this juncture, Blaine became acutely aware of the losses she had incurred and began to weep. Blaine, the reality is that given my work schedule and the inherent risks associated with my profession, I am unable to. Even if Louis had engaged in sexual intercourse with the entire Seahawks football team on the 50-yard line at halftime of a playoff game, it would not alter the fact that he is unable to gain custody of the girls. We will now proceed to the main point. It is imperative that you pay very close attention to this next part. His eyes narrowed in impatience as he extracted a thick, letter-sized envelope from his pocket and extended it to her. She proceeded to open the envelope and commence perusing its contents. As previously stated, if the divorce papers are not signed and submitted to my attorney's office within 36 hours, the contents of this envelope will be made available to your family members, colleagues, manager, and other individuals with whom you have had contact. This envelope contains a comprehensive account of your actions that led to the dissolution of your marriage. Additionally, it includes a detailed record of the terms and conditions that I was required to accept as part of continuing my marriage to you. The expenditure was considerable, but the investigator's report was worth the cost. I will also ensure that my daughters are aware of the circumstances surrounding the dissolution of their family. Blaine was visibly shocked by what she had seen. She was unable to fathom that this could be true. Continued to leaf through the investigator's report. She could only continue to make meaningless sounds, sniffle and cry throughout Louis's monologue, simply shaking her head in disbelief. It should not have happened. This is why Louis is unable to comprehend the situation. I am offering a quid pro quo, so I will do the following in exchange for your cooperation. I will never speak ill of you or blame you for the dissolution of our family in the eyes of my daughters. Furthermore, I will be polite to your boyfriend if we end up at one of the girls' parties together. I will even extend my hand in a gesture of cordiality to him if I am obliged to do so. I will conduct myself in a manner that is both respectful and civilized, as though we had simply decided to part ways amicably. I will do the same with each of your family members and friends. I will even provide childcare services should you and the Slytherin wish to embark on a last-minute weekend excursion. In short, I will endeavor to be the epitome of a cordial and amicable former partner. Thank you, LS, but this is all so unnecessary. Please cease mentioning that individual's name in my presence. Louis is a commendable individual. He is unaware of the circumstances surrounding the aforementioned individual. It is not as if he is aware of the situation. I must inquire as to who was responsible for disclosing this information to me. Regarding your relationship, he said that it is not advisable to deceive such a virtuous individual as yourself. Louis then interjected with a caustic laugh, effectively interrupting Blaine's monologue. Blaine, he did this to ensure that he would elicit the same response from me as you did. Has he already inquired about the possibility of moving in? Inwardly, her eyes opened wide, mirroring her mouth's expression. Louis observed that her demeanor resembled one of her favorite emojis. Blaine remained silent, her gaze fixed on her hands, which she was squeezing with noticeable intensity. Her posture was simultaneously rigid and fragile, as if she feared the slightest movement would cause her to disintegrate. I concurred with this assessment. Blaine, all this is documented in the report you are holding. Louis directed his fingers at the papers in her hands, emphasizing their significance. You are not his first, and you will not be his last. Ultimately, his track record is here, he is not like that. He truly loves me. She spoke so quietly that Louis had to strain to hear her pitiful words. This brought a knowing smile from him. He exhaled slowly, and a peaceful calm came over him as if another gentle breeze from his beloved lake was washing his face. It is almost over. He knew he had chosen the right path. He understood that there was a risk, but now everything was under control. He was confident that everything would fall into place as he wanted. His voice softened significantly. Look at me, Blaine. We are nearly at the end of this process. It is crucial that you exercise the utmost caution. She gazed up at him, her tear-stained face a canvas of confusion, ruined mascara, and fear. Her ideal world had been obliterated. When she finally looked into his eyes, she saw a stony, threatening face with eyes as black as night. He glared at her and demanded, "Take care of my girls, Blaine. They are our girls." Louis protested weakly, her timidity making it sound more like a question. "For me, at least for a couple of years." What is the meaning of this statement? The odor of her fear was perceptible. She was adamant that she would never give them away. She had already done so, although he was not yet aware of this fact. One way or another, her boyfriend would take care of it. He spoke with complete seriousness. Has he already used this phrase in terms of your relationship with the subject, it would be beneficial for you to ingest a small quantity of the substance. This will significantly enhance the quality of your sexual experiences, making them more intense and satisfying. Your nerve endings will be stimulated to a remarkable degree. Additionally, a small quantity of the substance should be combined with a beverage to enhance its effects. The subject then looked at her hand, displaying a bashful expression. It is likely that the subject will soon begin sharing you with his friends. It would be beneficial for you to consider the possibility of being loved by several men simultaneously. Justin is a commendable individual, and you may find it appealing to experience such a relationship. Blaine shook her head slowly, gazing into space, and murmured, "I refuse to allow that." She continued, "He professes to love me. Louis was despite the arduous nature of the coursework required for my bachelor's degree in fire safety, I have approximately 2 years remaining before I must complete it. Upon Frank's eventual retirement, I will be eligible to apply for the position of fire marshal. This should be a period of relative stability for you, as you begin to experience a decline in your performance. By that time, I will have filed for full custody, and you will probably be so stoned that you will not even care. You are mistaken. He is not like that at all. Please, LS, I truly love you and our family. Why can you not see this?" Louis growled at her, "You have never seen it. In truth, I do not believe you are capable of loving anyone but yourself. I was simply blinded by love for who I thought you were. I was merely a convenient source of support for you. The girls only served to reinforce your power over me when your boyfriend showed up. You played into his hands and threw away your family like yesterday's sour milk. Perhaps we can start over," she suggested, her eyes brimming with tears. In her eyes, there was no possibility of reconciliation. She believed that there was nothing left to salvage, and that to do so would expose her own shortcomings as a wife, mother, and individual. Instead, she saw him continuing to maintain the pretense of a happy and loving relationship with the other woman. She was determined to follow the path of self-destruction. The situation can be described as a form of self-destruction, as there is no viable alternative. If there were an alternative, it would necessitate an admission of personal accountability. This would entail acknowledging the shortcomings of one's own actions. However, this is not a viable option, as it would result in an inability to cope with the reality of one's situation. Consequently, the individual is forced to accept the situation and live with it for the remainder of their life. However, if there is an alternative, and the two individuals in question truly love each other, it is likely that this will become evident in due course. The magical lover may begin to suggest that your involvement in childcare is an impediment. He may initially propose a solution such as allowing Louis to assume primary responsibility for the children on a more regular basis. You are unlikely to challenge this proposal, as it would entail relinquishing the sexual intimacy you currently enjoy. You previously expressed a similar sentiment when I suggested that your relationship would become untenable if you were to share me with this individual. He promised that he would leave if she did not give the girls to him. Consequently, she was back to square one. He smiled at her confusion. In any case, he would win and she would lose. It was only a matter of time. He was a patient man. Louis looked around the azure surface of the lake again for a moment. The breeze died down, the water was like glass in the closet door. It was time to go. He swore to himself that he would return. He often visited this location with his daughters, who enjoyed it immensely. However, he desired for them to develop a similar affinity for the place as he did. He stood up, not because he was finished with her, but because the overwhelming adrenaline in his body prevented him from remaining still. He needed to discuss one final crucial detail with her. Louis walked around the bench, he placed his hands on the smooth varnished teak on either side of Blanche's shoulders and grasped it firmly. He then leaned down slowly and whispered in her ear in a quiet, threatening voice. He said, "Tell your son that if I see even a hint of impropriety with my daughters, I will kill him. It doesn't matter what it is, even if it's just sexual innuendo." As I observed them in their night attire, I resolved to take action. I will not allow him to evade me or live in fear of my reprisals. I will confront him directly and force him to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. I want him to realize at the last moment that it was I who brought his miserable existence to an end. The same holds true for you, Blaine. His voice began to tremble, and he felt a tightening in his throat. The pressure of his grip intensified as adrenaline was released with each word he spoke. You inform him of this, Blaine. At the final word, there was a loud cracking sound as the hardwood gave way to Louis's tight grasp. Blaine shuddered noticeably. Louis looked down at the broken piece of latticework, perhaps a result of dry rot. For her part, Blaine did not look at him. She continued to sob and whimper, her body shaking as if she were experiencing a physical reaction. Blaine, I must remind you that the time is 36 hours, not 37. I am now departing. He observed his hands, noting that his nails were broken, his hands were bloody, and littered with shrapnel. He found this curious, as the injuries did not cause him pain. He regarded Blaine silently for a moment, noting that the man appeared to be an empty shell of a person. He took one last look at his surroundings, took a deep breath of the clean mountain air, and then departed.